If you're an American and you want to write for Doctor Who, you are out of luck. The BBC does not want your pitches. The BBC doesn't want you. We're going to talk about that. This is Kneon. This is CLOWNFISH TV. We're going to talk about Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, trying out to be a writer for Doctor Who and the BBC shutting him down, shooting him down in spectacular fashion. So this is a really interesting thing to talk about, especially now since Doctor Who, the ratings are in the gutter. They're at an all-time low. Well, maybe not an all-time low, but lower than they have been in a very long time. We talk about the ratings probably about once a week. We're watching the train wreck in real time. Doctor Who went from a series high, introducing Jodie Whittaker, to what some people are calling the lowest point in the ratings in 32 years. Again, there's some debate about that because I do think that some of Peter Capaldi's stories did pull lower ratings than Jodie Whittaker's, but I digress. Before we get into the video, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants. Guys, we're closing in on 100,000 subs. I don't know what we're going to do for 100,000. We're going to have to do something special. Still thinking about it. But let's talk about Doctor Who today. Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, suffered brutal rejection as Doctor Who writer. This is coming from metro.co.uk. So this is really interesting because I do understand the cultural significance of Doctor Who to British people. I get it. I have some friends across the pond who, are like, look, Doctor Who is an institution over here. It doesn't mean as much to Americans as it does to us, and I completely get that. That being said, I think it's kind of strange that when you have somebody who can write fantastic scripts for the show, and the show has been declining in quality for years, you think you would tap them to come on board. And I get that it's a very British show. However, we're not talking about casting an American as the Doctor. We're talking about somebody writing a script for Doctor Who and being disqualified simply because of nationality. Now, it's really interesting. Everybody accuses Americans of being xenophobic. And I'm not saying that this was a xenophobic decision, but before we get into it, I want to point out that, it doesn't work in reverse. It doesn't work in reverse because half of our American superheroes are currently being played by British or Irish actors, including the big ones. Superman. Superman was last played by Henry Cavill. He's probably the most American superhero next to Captain America. Spider-Man. We've had two Spider-Men. The last two Spider-Men. A New York character, very American character, both of them played by Brits. We've had a British Batman. Again, it's just kind of funny that it doesn't seem to work in reverse. Doctor Strange, again, a New Yorker, being played by a Brit. And the list goes on. And to be clear, I'm not saying we should have an American in the TARDIS, although at this point it seems kind of like a free-for-all who can be in the TARDIS. So I'm not advocating for an American Doctor, but an American screenwriter, with writing credentials, I don't think it would be a bad thing, especially if they have a good story to tell. But the rejection was brutal, and they didn't even mince words. They didn't even mince words about why he was being rejected. So this is really interesting. Stephen King's writing skills have been well and truly handed down to his son, Joe Hill. And we're going to talk about Joe Hill. Joe Hill is the creator of Locke Key, the comic book series that has recently become a Netflix series. He does have writing chops. He does. But that still doesn't mean the family don't have to deal with rejection. And in one case of Doctor Who, a simple no was replaced with one of the harshest critiques to date. Joe has revealed that after being a lifelong fan of the much-loved BBC series, he was delighted after being given the opportunity to offer up ideas for the show. However, the results were not as positive as he'd hoped for. In fact, they were pretty darn harsh. Speaking to the Horror Show podcast, Joe explained, "I had some ideas for Doctor Who, and I really wanted to write for that show. And my screen agent got me a chance to pitch on it. So I spent a month and a half working on 3 pitches, and man, I have never imagined harder in my whole life. He really loved Doctor Who. Literally using every opportunity he had to get it right, even pulling in author Neil Gaiman, who has written for the show, to help him out. Things went south quickly with the harshest rejection note once he'd finally put out his application. With trepidation and my heart in my mouth, I sent in my pitches. That's always hard. It's always hard, he told host Brian Keane. And a couple weeks passed and I got ... The email I got back said, "We have never let an American write Doctor Who, and if we were going to, we wouldn't start with you." Ouch. Ouch. That is brutal. That is brutal. Especially now. Especially with Doctor Who being in the gutter right now, story-wise. I mean, they're going out and they're hiring people who have no apparent love for the show, no familiarity with the show. They've got, what, soap opera writers working on it now? And you're going to let the fact that the guy is an American, even though he's a lifelong fan, the fact that he's an American, you're going to keep him out of Doctor Who because of that. That's pretty cruel. Is that not the most smoking rejection of all time? He laughed, absolutely savage. Thankfully, he's managed to get something arguably better, landing his own Netflix series Locke Key based on the IDW comic books. Yeah, so this is coming from the Metro, and they don't seem to take a very positive view of Americans being kept out of Doctor Who just because they're Americans. I mean, they could have come up with any other reason, right? I've gotten plenty of rejection letters, and a lot of times you know what the reason is, or you have suspicions as to what the reason is. They just don't articulate it. You know, they're just like, well, it's not a good fit. It's maybe the style's not right, whatever. But you know there's something else going on. However, they were polite enough to cover it up a little bit and be like, yeah, this isn't quite what we're looking for. I've never heard of a rejection, especially from such a high-profile show like this, you know, being like, you're an American, we've never let an American write Doctor Who, and up yours, pal. You know, the guy is Stephen King's son, you know, he's got his own career going on. He's probably qualified, or at least more qualified than the people they have working on it. Again, nobody's asking for an American in the TARDIS. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a guy who wants to write one episode of Doctor Who and who has the credentials to back it up. And again, you know, we're not applying the same rules to our American superheroes. Very American characters, all played by Brits. I just want to point that out. So apparently there are some a-holes working at the top at the BBC. Apparently they like to fail. You know, could you imagine if you got Stephen King even to write an episode of Doctor Who? Could you imagine if we had some American science fiction authors come in and write episodes of Doctor Who? Maybe it would turn the show around. Maybe it would. But yeah, Locke Key is interesting. This is Joe Hill's probably his biggest claim to fame right now. The Locke Key series from IDW, which has become a Netflix series. I haven't watched it yet. I've heard mixed things. I've heard some people said it was really good. Other people said they took the teeth out of it. The comic is considered a modern day classic. It is one of the biggest hits that IDW has had, and they're literally betting the farm on Locke Key at this point. Everything IDW is doing is about streaming, about movies, about media, and if this show does not perform, then IDW might be in some pretty serious trouble. They already are. IDW is not in a good place right now, but I'm probably going to check the show out just because I feel obligated to, for sure. But that is his biggest hit so far. So just kind of a side note, I came across this on Twitter. Somebody put it out there from a couple of years ago when they were asking why they didn't have a female doctor, you know, when Capaldi was introduced. And we talk about Capaldi a lot because we're always comparing the ratings of Jodie Whittaker to Peter Capaldi's run on Doctor Who. I do think some of his episodes performed worse than Jodie Whittaker's. And it's kind of funny, Geeky, who she checked out on Doctor Who during the Capaldi run, and she said, you know what? I hated Peter Capaldi. I didn't like the Moffat era, but everything that they did is still better than what they're doing right now on Doctor Who. And I have to agree, as much as, you know, a lot of people throw shade at Capaldi, especially his last season it still felt more Doctor Who than what we've gotten during the Chibnall era, because Chibnall does not seem to be a science fiction fan. He really doesn't. He's a drama person, and he's just kind of throwing a little bit of sci-fi into the mix with Doctor Who. It's very bland. It's a very bland show. There's no fantastic elements, but it's interesting that 2-3 years ago, Steven Moffat said Doctor Who is not just for progressive liberals, it's for Brexit voters too. And everybody was trying to get him to put a woman in the TARDIS during his run, and he wouldn't do it. He said we could have replaced Matt Smith with a woman, given that his doctor was more sexless and less of a lad, Moffat said, but then I got obsessed with seeing Peter in the TARDIS. Well, Moffat supports Whittaker's casting. He did have a rebuke for critics who said he should have cast a woman earlier. This isn't a show exclusively for progressive liberals. This is also for people who voted Brexit, Moffat claimed. That's not me politically at all, but we have to keep everyone on board. We have to keep everyone on board, and they're not doing that. They've actually, Chibnall has basically said this is a show for a progressive audience now. That is what this show is, and you're going to like it. You're going to like it. It's a show for a progressive audience who's British, for Brits, by Brits, for British progressive people, I guess. But it's just the double standard. It's very interesting to see this show, and I think people are going to look back in years to come, because the show is on the decline. I don't think it's going to get canceled, but I don't think this era of Doctor Who is going to be looked on favorably years to come. I think in the years to come, people are going to be like, yeah, this is when Doctor Who really jumped the shark, and it started to decline massively, and hopefully it leads to another reinvention that sees the show pick up in popularity again, that sees the progressives and the Brexit voters come back on board, and the ratings pick up again, and merchandise to start flowing again, and people to actually start talking about Doctor Who in positive terms, because right now it's the subject of derision and ridicule by many people on the internet. So very interesting story. Just thought we'd share that. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, and we'll talk later. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.